You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Hello, Star Wars fans. I'm Alex,
And I'm Connor.
and today we are talking about Star Wars.
And this is the sixth installment of our expanded universe review of Star Wars novels. Alex has made it his goal to get caught up with the expanded universe lore, and I believe this year he's going to be caught up, and we are going to continue where we left off.
That is correct. So, um, for those who listened to the previous EU review episode, episode 49, we got from novels Ferro Squad through Cobalt Squadron. So that completed the lead up to the release of The Last Jedi. We will now be talking about novels that continue expanding on the New Republic after the events of the Return of the Jedi, that expand on the character of Thrawn, filling out every part of his story that we know um, before Rebels season 4, and then his appearance later in Ahsoka, and then just discussing the works that were released as tie-ins to Solo, the prequel movie that discussed Han Solo's life before we meet him in A New Hope.
I know that there were plenty of novels around the backstory of Han Solo in Legends, and I think there may be some crossover with characters and ideas. I believe that his mentor, what's his name?
Beckett.
Woody Beckett, Woody Harrelson Beckett, was actually introduced in those Legends books, so it'll be interesting to hear how these new ones compare.
All right, so as those who know who have listened to our previous EU review episodes, we're going to talk about each novel, do a brief sketch of what happens in the novel, talk about how it works as an independent work of fiction, how it works as a piece of Star Wars media and expanding the greater universe, and say who we think would like this book. So, without further ado, let us go on. And Connor, please interrupt me with any questions you might have that the average or non-average Star Wars fan might have about this novel.
Sounds good.
All right, so the first novel we have is Last Shot, um, written by Daniel Jose Oder, now one of the architects of the High Republic. So Last Shot is a prequel to Solo, while at the same time expanding on Han Solo's story after Return of the Jedi, and in fact also after the events of the Aftermath trilogy that we've previously talked about. So we have, and it's a buddy story with Lando Calrissian as well. So this is told in two storylines. We have it's the backstory to Lando in L3 before the events of Solo, where we see them involved in a dangerous job with a MacGuffin device that can take control of droids, and then the antagonist that they see in that backstory plot, Fyzen Gore, a mad scientist who likes to fuse flesh and droids together,
Ooh.
both grafting droid parts onto people and human fleshy parts onto droids in a very unique and horrifying worldview. Lots of body horror there. He then reappears wanting his transmitter back that he believes that he knows that Lando stole from him 10 years ago. So it turns out at the behest of L3, who is all about droid freedom, as we know.
Doesn't Dengar get fused with droid parts at some point? The bounty hunter? I remember seeing this in a visual dictionary, and I know those aren't exactly canon.
No, they've given that plot line over to another bounty hunter who's now almost entirely droid, appearing in the Bounty Hunters comic that's currently running.
Gotcha. That's creepy, but so we get a little bit of that Lando backstory with this. How does Han's backstory fit in with the overall plot?
So this novel doesn't talk much about Han's backstory. So we get um, this is Lando in L3 before meeting Han in
Okay.
Solo, and then this is Lando and Han and how their lives change in the New Republic. So we see both of them struggling to adapt to life in a more peaceful time. We see Han Solo heading up a pilot organization and not loving it. As we know, then in a couple years later, he then starts his own racing organization in the saber races, and he's much happier there. But he's a new father. Our first scene with Han in this book is him, trying to feed a 1-year-old Ben Solo, while also trying not to embarrass his wife, who is trying to put together the New Republic government.
Mhm.
And then when Lando shows up saying, there's a terrorist who's going to kill everyone in Cloud City unless we do what he tells me, he's like, yeah, that doesn't go over well.
Mhm.
So, yeah, we have the two primary stories, and it's told through a variety of points of view. We flash back and forth between lots of point of view in Last Shot. So we have chapters from the point of view of Fyzen Gore, our horrifying antagonist, this mad doctor, surgeon, droid, smith, who grafts parts onto people, who has the devices that can just take control of droids. And in fact, the droids see it as torture, what he's doing to both humans and droids.
Mhm.
So droids do not like him either, particularly the droid Gatra and L3's secret droid rights organization either. So I won't do a whole beat by beat for the plot, which rapidly goes between the present and the past.
Mhm.
The important things to know: we do meet Lando falls in love in this novel with Kasha, a Twi'lek woman and skilled pilot and slicer. They have Lando at first sees it as a fling, but then realizes it's something more serious. What happens to her, we don't quite know, but enough that she is likely the mother of his daughter,
Ooh.
that then his daughter is who he's seeking in a later novel, Shadow of the Sith,
Mhm.
and why he is still present, looking for the knife of Ochi of Bestoon in The Rise of Skywalker.
Is his daughter implied to be Jana in The Rise of Skywalker, or was that more a hint towards let us both find our families?
Those both find our families.
Okay.
I mean, he thinks that his daughter was kidnapped by the First Order, so I guess it's possible. But he knew her name and her chain code and everything. She
Sure.
was 7 when she was kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
So this is before Lando has a child, but he does fall in love, and this is it's a rapid fire novel. Sort of primarily, the importance of the plot here is about sort of L3, and we know her manipulating / engaging Lando and keeping this transmitter out of Fyzen Gore's hands to help droids. And then later on, L3 is one of the primary droid minds that helps control the Falcon and its hyperspace motivator. And so we get her ghost of her presence in the Millennium Falcon itself, helping Han and Solo back in the present day.
I don't like L3, but I enjoy that she is kind of a sort of a rusty, cantankerous being, and then when her mind is entered into the Millennium Falcon then becomes a rusty, cantankerous being.
We have backstory for the Millennium Falcon as well. So, as a work of fiction, the rapid fire changes between points of view and all that
Mm-hmm.
can be a lot. It's kind of Daniel Jose Oder's style. So, as you'll see in the New Republic books, if you read any of those by him. So, if you don't love that style, it might be a little challenging. I personally enjoyed this novel because I like the Lando parts, and seeing Han trying to adapt to life in the New Republic was nice. As a work of Star Wars fiction, the most interesting part was really about sort of this body horror droid fusion. As we talked about in a previous episode about droids, we think droids are underutilized in the setting and examined. So seeing these sentient droids horrified by having these organic parts grafted onto them, we see a cult that believe that replacing parts of their body with droid parts brings them closer to being the perfect being.
Ew.
So all of that is interesting, and probably the most interesting part of the setting is a piece of Star Wars fiction. And expanding on, it sets up Han's role in it shows, okay, here's what he did after the Aftermath trilogy, here's what he did before Bloodline, and it fills in, here's how Lando got in the position he's in when we find him in Shadow of the Sith, where how did he get a daughter and how is she missing, and why is Lando so respectable now?
Mm-hmm.
So we see that he fell in love, had a daughter, and then she was kidnapped. So it's a lot of setup. As a prequel to Solo, other than introducing the character of L3, it's not really necessary.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't do a whole lot for young Han either. So,
And I think that Lando's a kind of character that has so many adventures that if they ever get the Lando show off the ground, that will be a fantastic setting. I could see a short story collection where we have the various tales of Lando Calrissian. But yeah, he's best served, I think, in that regard, where we get to see this multicolored past that he has.
it's from Han 10 years after getting the Falcon, but before A New Hope. and then we see how L3 is still part of the ship.
Mhm.
So yeah, again, it's a little bit of a fragmented plot. Some interesting ideas, especially on the droid side. Not really necessary reading to understand Solo. It doesn't really expand on anything we see there. Um, it does interesting character work for older Han Solo and older Lando, which was my favorite thing.
Mhm.
Seeing middle-aged Lando in love with this Twi'lek woman who won't put up with any of his shit was enjoyable. And like, oh my god, I'm the one who breaks people's hearts. She might break my heart. What do I do? And then married man, Han Solo just clapping at a soldier and is like, good luck. That was great.
You'll need it, yeah. But so it sounds fun, harmless, but not exactly a driving piece of media.
If you love Han and Lando, go and give it a read. If you honestly, if you like body horror, which not some people don't, but like if that's like, man, when I watch horror movies, like the kind of body horror thing, like this is the most body horror I've ever seen in a Star Wars
Mhm.
anything. Like we get a surgeon who operates on people to attach droid parts to them, and he murders a whole crime syndicate with one of his inventions. There's a bloody crime story in here that runs throughout, where as this original Phison Gore character.
Mhm.
So if you like sort of the mad scientists, if you read Dr. Aphra and were interested in the part where our other mad scientist like implanted a bomb in her and another droid and forced them to work together, uh, it's very similar to this. So go give it a read. But
Yeah, I mean, we get some body horror with Vader, but that's only goes so far.
so next up, we'll talk about the other prequel to Solo, Most Wanted, released as a tie-in before the Solo movie came out, by Ray Carson, who also wrote Canto Bight, a previous novel we talked about. So this is more of a straight-up prequel to Solo, in that it takes place in the years before that film, and is entirely from the perspectives of Han Solo and Kira.
We get a lot of light cast on Kira's character and her possible motivations for wanting to, or maybe not wanting to, but being all right with entering a crime syndicate.
Oh, definitely. So we see how hard life is for Kira and Han working as part of the White Worms, Lady Proxima's child labor-based crime syndicate. It's really challenging for them. Han is actually one of the more idealistic crime children. He has friends that he has a Rhodian friend that he saved from being beat up, who is our third character, sort of our foil character for both Kira and Han throughout the novel. We have Kira trying to take on better and more dangerous jobs for Lady Proxima. But then turns out she realizes, sort of midway into the novel, she was sent into a deal to try to get a piece of technology and was given an insulting amount of money from Lady Proxima. The Lady Proxima was either trying to punch above her weight class or just didn't care if Kira was killed. So Kira quickly realizes that she's expendable. So we definitely get the sort of the setup here about why Kira and Han would be seeking to leave Lady Proxima's employ as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Kira in the film acted very much as a foil or a parallel to Han, and just they both come from the same source. They both were entering the darker side of society, and when they emerged together, we see Han very much thinking, okay, let's just pick up where things left off, and Kira being very much set in the present and unable to do so, keeping her sights on the future of Crimson Dawn.
Yeah, Kira has always had more of a future in mind. So we see them falling in love with each other. Kira attracted to Han's sort of idealism, which is interesting to think about for Han Solo, but compared to the underbelly of Corellia, Han really does start as more idealistic and more willing to fight for his friends than most people in the White Worms. Yeah, and it's just, so it's this, the primary driving plot is this crime deal gone wrong. Kira has the information that was going to be traded at this black market back alley auction. She's pursued through Corellia for it. It's Crimson Dawn is the person who's looking for it, so she makes an early contact with someone in Crimson Dawn and basically has their business card at the end, even after things go badly. So
a little bit of setup point to where she will go after her and Han split up.
Yeah, so and the novel pretty much directly leads into the dynamic that we see at the start of Solo, where Han and Kira are an item. They are desperately trying to leave the White Worms. They're aging out of who Lady Proxima even employs, and they have very few prospects as the Empire continues to crack down and make life hard on Corellia.
What the Star Wars book? Does this help? Does this strengthen the story told in Solo? Would you say this is recommended reading for fans of Solo in general?
Yeah, for Most Wanted, especially if you like Kira, she's really the new character that we see here. If you like young Han, also a good look. For those who like, oh, the rise of the Empire period and seeing the crushing weight that they have, you want to know more about the droid Gatra and their sort of their back alley criminal dealings. So it's a good crime story. First off, um, again, it's a pretty quick read as well. So it's a piece of Star Wars media. It does some interesting work with the crime area, Corellia, and all of that. Is it absolutely essential? I would say no. Uh, it's not even really essential viewing for Solo itself, but I would say more so than The Last Shot, Most Wanted does serve as kind of a direct prequel.
Gotcha. So, light crime novel, and you know, there are various opinions of Solo, but I quite enjoyed that opening, just where we have the young Scraps and trying to search for safety and freedom from uh, their slave owner, I guess. But yeah, it makes sense for Han to be a little bit more ideal because he hasn't had his heart crushed yet by Kira leaving. That works well as the motivator for him being a little bit more of a realist than an idealist. So yeah, any other thoughts on Most Wanted?
Nope, I think that's about it. Again, this is another one I would say as a novel, fairly enjoyable. The story is rather tightly plotted. It's taking over the course of just a few days, so you get interesting stuff about Corellia and really how poverty works in the Star Wars universe too. So,
Interesting.
right, so that takes us through Most Wanted. We'll now briefly look at another novel where you'll know that a lot of Disney also releases a lot of junior novels for Star Wars, intended for younger readers. And a lot of these are just simply simpler retellings of other novels that we've talked about. But there are a few original works, and I do mention those that are relevant from a world building perspective. And that is this true with, and Connor, you want to dramatically read the name.
The Mighty Chewbacca in the Forest of Fear. This sounds like an animated film or episode in the Droids series that came out that no one else remembers.
Yes. So this is a junior novel. There's not a lot to it, but we follow Chewbacca on a job to recover a dark side artifact from the planet of Ushru to save Han Solo's life, who's been captured. Uh, so we are young protagonist, because this is a junior novel, is Mavelyn Trillick, an entirely new character. And it was also released right before Solo as an expansion to Chewbacca's character and showing his loyalty to Han.
Would this be a direct sequel to Solo? Would it take place during the timeline of the film?
I would say it's after Solo, because we see this is Chewbacca and Han already working together aboard the Millennium Falcon. So this book, written by Tom Engelberger, lets Chewbacca, originally thinking he's just smuggling some illegal Tuca cats, and then the droid that's with him is secretly a rebel spy. So it's not a whole lot to it, but it turns out that the book that they're after is full of teachings about the dark side, such that even our main characters and Chewbacca can barely stand to be near it. I like the novel because even though it's like a junior novel, like Chewbacca's like, oh yeah, I worked with Jedi before, even mentioning Ahsoka, Luminara, and Yoda in the book. And Chewbacca also thinks about his son, who we meet in the Aftermath trilogy as well. So,
would that be one Lobaka?
No, it's Lumpururu.
Oh, okay. Wait, Lumpy? They made Lumpy canon?
Lumpururu.
I think we need to delve into this in a future episode, because there's one piece of Star Wars media where Chewbacca also has a wife and child, and names may be similar, but that's a tale for another day. So as far as a read goes, this is a young adult novel. I think it can range from
Not even young adult, junior novel.
sure
So, a 10 or 12-year-old could read this book in a couple hours.
for
But
the painful read, painless read that helps fill in the gaps of Star Wars. Where does it fall in that spectrum?
I have some of the junior novels for Star Wars are painful to read, and I've mentioned those before. This one was fine. The plot, as with many junior novels, is very fast paced. We don't really stop to ruminate on anything. But I found the world building to be very interesting because we deal with on this planet of Ushuru, we have a creature called the Vathier, who is a giant dark side creature that lives at the bottom of the chasm and feeds on the force of living creatures. And on this planet, it's the source of the dark side, and the trees themselves on the planet are sources of the light side and the living force. So
Chewbacca is very much that creature of nature, so we makes sense to have a little bit of a more naturalistic leaning towards the force, the light side and the dark side. But yeah, it's any other thoughts on the junior novel?
oh, just also that the Rebel Droid I mentioned is K2SO of Cassian Andor fame, who is here to ensure that the dark side book they retrieve does not fall into the Empire's hands, but instead ends up with the rebellion.
Yeah,
So we have Chewbacca taking a dangerous job to save Han Solo, accompanied by a junior sidekick who is almost affected by a giant dark side creature, and then at the end the book is given to K2SO. So
a neat tie-in, neat, harmless, painless.
yeah. So I mean, if you're a completionist like me and want to read everything Star Wars, and you're also really interested in like giant dark side creatures, take an hour or two and read this book. But it's hardly essential reading. It was the junior novel tie-in to the Solo release.
Gotcha. Does that leave us with any other Solo material, or do we transition to our next topic of EU?
Yeah, so that was all of the three books that they released as tie-ins to Solo before it came out.
You can tell they definitely didn't give it the same loving treatment as The Force Awakens, which is unfortunate because Solo is not a bad film.
Yeah. Of those, I think most wanted is the most required viewing, but there they go. So our next novel in our EU review is a continuation of a previous novel we talked about, Thrawn, and this one is Thrawn Alliances.
As far as where this falls in the timeline, is this more of Thrawn's backstory prior to joining the Empire? Is he joined the Empire at this point? Where does this fall?
So this novel is actually split. We have two plot lines that we bounce back and forth between this one. So we see then Captain Thrawn, as part of the Chiss Ascendancy, on a mission on the planet of Batu and other planets with General Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars. And then we get Grand Admiral Thrawn of the Galactic Empire working directly with Darth Vader in the present day. So
a little bit of a Godfather 2 split here. I'm guessing that the two stories are interconnected in some way. Does Thrawn have any insight into Skywalker's transformation into Vader? Is he aware of this?
Well, one of the big parts of the plot is that Thrawn suspects for most of the novel that Vader is Anakin, because Thrawn is very good. And a key moment of the novel is when Thrawn sees Darth Vader pilot his TIE fighter and immediately recognizes the piloting style of Anakin Skywalker from their battle.
As you would.
Yeah, so written by Timothy Zahn, Thrawn Alliances generally is rated as one of like the lowest Thrawn novels, but I really enjoy it for the split narrative that then influence each other. I'm a sucker for a nice plot influencing subplot into different timelines. So
is Thrawn always on the side of Anakin in this? Is he partnered with Skywalker and partnered with Vader?
Mostly, but they're all each pursuing their own agenda throughout there. There's never the alliances between the two are never easy. I mean, in the Clone Wars era subplot, Thrawn is there to retrieve technology on behalf of the Chiss Ascendancy, and Anakin is there to save Padme, who one of her handmaidens spies was murdered and she's been captured. So Anakin is there to save her, and Thrawn is there for intelligence on his enemies and to retrieve a key piece of technology. So by doing all of that, So, but then they still are mostly at the same purposes where they need to destroy this. The Separatists have established a droid factory too close to Chist's ascendancy area lands for comfort for the Chists, so Thrawn also needs to destroy this factory, which Anakin wants to as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's using cortosis to create droids, which if everyone knows cortosis is immune to blaster fire and lightsabers, but is otherwise very fragile. So, and very difficult to work with. So it's a cortosis droid factory for our KOTOR fans.
Nice. So as far as building up Thrawn and his character for what we see in Rebels and what we see in Ahsoka, I'm guessing it does a fairly good job, especially if he's able to pick up on the hints that Anakin is in fact Vader.
And unlike Thrawn itself, we get more chapters here from Thrawn's perspective, seeing his inner thoughts and the way in which he analyzes things, which is really great to see, because we see him putting the pieces together in his head, and we see the unique way that he sees the world, which is very clinical and somewhat terrifying, even though we see more of the novel told also from Anakin and Vader's perspective. So as General Anakin Skywalker, he sees him as a very serious and a military man, very loyal to his people, with a very strong tactical sense, and Anakin almost wonders if he's force sensitive due to the level of insight that he has on people. But then Thrawn just lays out the logical deductions he made to arrive at his points. Anakin is surprised by what Thrawn is. It is also disappointed when it turns out Thrawn had his own goals in mind, his own objective beyond just saving Padme and destroying the factory.
Thrawn is a great foil wherein he doesn't feel and have instinct. It's all about logical deduction and having that perception of what a culture will do based on their past history.
Yeah. It's interesting in the present day, so then we get Darth Vader with Thrawn. And, Darth Vader terrifies everyone. Doesn't terrify Thrawn. Thrawn acknowledges Vader's authority, doesn't challenge him in public, but doesn't agree with him. At one point, Thrawn encourages his bridge officers to contradict him or bring him information he needs to know.
Yeah.
And the first time someone does this, Vader's about to force choke someone to death. You've dared disrespected your superior officer and spoken out of turn, interrupted my meeting, and Thrawn is like, no, I need them to bring me this information, so please continue, Ensign or Lieutenant. And goes on with what he needs to know. And so they have this very uneasy dynamic where Vader is considering whether he needs to kill Thrawn for the whole novel. And Thrawn knows he is just indispensable enough not to be easily killed and pushes that to its absolute limit. Because another part of this continues the subplot from Thrawn about the gravity mass generators, and it turns out a bunch of Chiss children are being imprisoned on a planet, and Thrawn manipulates his task force to go and attack the people holding the Chiss children under the guise that they were also a threat to the Empire. Which were they? Were they not? Who knows? But we literally get Vader's fist strike force attacking a enemy ship, saving some force-sensitive Chiss children. And there's this great scene where the force-sensitive children, though they don't speak basic, can sense that there are enemies hiding behind corridors and point through windows and bulkheads, and stormtroopers just gun down the enemies as they go by, as these force-sensitive children just point at where all the enemies are. And the leader of Vader's detachment is even man, it'd be really nice to have more of these force-sensitive people around, with a great use of irony about the fall of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's a book that builds upon the Star Wars universe quite a bit. It's always great to have some of Vader's perspective, but also Thrawn, just because he is being built as this next primary antagonist, and is one of the few things that have been salvaged from Legends. So it sounds like it's a fitting Star Wars book, but how does it read as a novel in itself?
I really like it. I think the themes between the two primary plots feed into each other very well. Again, some people say it's the weakest of the Thrawn trilogy. I think it's just different. Mm-hmm. I like seeing Thrawn's direct thoughts in his head. I like seeing the thoughts of General Anakin Skywalker contrasted with those of present-day Darth Vader. So I really enjoyed the novel just as a book itself. I found it tightly plotted, but it also takes time for character interactions to breathe. We get just conversations between Vader and Thrawn, Anakin and Thrawn. We don't just rush from one battle action set piece to the next. We have confrontation, resolution, dramatic tension. So all of those things that make a good novel.
Well, that's refreshing to hear. And we will have another Thrawn book to discuss, but we have some others to get to before. But any other final thoughts on Thrawn alliances?
Just if this was a novel for someone who really likes Anakin Skywalker in the Clone Wars, who really likes Thrawn and wants to know more about him, who wants to see the Empire functioning before the Battle of Yavin, so who wants to know more about the Chiss themselves and Force sensitivity, who found the idea of Cortosis droids being fought by Anakin during the Clone Wars to be interesting, or who likes the planet of Batu, because this is the first mention of the planet of Batu in canon, which will then have a series of novels to talk about in the future. So the next book is called Queen's Shadow, and starts off a trilogy of books that focus on Padme's handmaidens. This is the first one, and sort of established that, and it follows Padme Amidala as she is transitioning from queen to senator, and the differences that her life entails as she has to change from being just the monarch of a planet to then being a senator, and all of the different expectations and challenges that go through that. So this novel, I enjoyed it because the stakes are not particularly high. There's only one point where Padme almost is tricked into going into a building that might be demolished and could have been hurt or killed as a political machination. Most of the time we're worried about Padme's political reputation and career and the fate of all of her friends and handmaids, less about what's the state of the galaxy. So we see more of Padme adjusting to political life instead. So it's a nice character study on Padme, and also the other main characters of the novel are her handmaids. We see them particularly in The Phantom Menace, and then one of them dies to save her in Attack of the Clones. And we learned that one of her primary handmaids, the one who actually was played by Keira Knightley and switched places with her during The Phantom Menace, is named Sabe.
That was going to be my first question. Is this the Keira Knightley handmaiden or the Rose Byrne handmaiden? So
this is the Keira Knightley Sabe, who is the one who is most able to trade places with Padme. In fact, does so often.
What's her perspective and role in the novel?
Yeah, so Sabe is completely and utterly loyal to Padme, and does whatever she asks, like traded places with her during the Phantom Menace. At one point, impersonates her during a state dinner. Palpatine at one point, in an aside, realizes they've changed place and finds it very amusing. And also files that away as information he can use in the future. So
some ideas about a dual identity, which he's already been developing.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see Padme through the lens of someone who is not a Jedi or in love with her. Well, Sabe is in love with her, but not in a romantic sense, but is completely loyal to her. So it's interesting to see, and also you get more about galactic politics. So we see, how does the Senate function? How do these committees work? How does Padme start to build political capital, become part of these committees, make political allies of Bail Organa? Several times she keeps introducing votes at the wrong time and has to sort of learn she has to form a political party. She can't just be a lone idealist. And so she's eventually invited in to join Bail Organa's political party. Originally, they were reticent to invite her because she staged an armed revolution and put Palpatine in power. So they didn't think that she was kind of allying with their more peaceful, progressive policies, but then it turns out to be a ready ally. And there's also a subplot where there is we meet Corvus, the fling that is mentioned in the Clone Wars.
Oh, yeah.
So we see that, and it turns out Corvus was a friend and another junior senator, and they work together on a great bill, and it gets passed, and Corvus is like, well, obviously now you would like to kiss and make out and be my lover. And Padme's like, we're just friends. And Corvus is like, how dare you lead me on? So we learn, Padme did care for Corvus the way in which he took her, I need time to figure myself out, as an immediate rejection, was like, we don't deal with incels here. So we learn that subplot that gets filled in as well. So I really enjoy the character of Sabe, who does not have the same charisma and political touch that Padme does, but is also very skilled in other areas. And we learn more about her other handmaids as well.
So this seems like a book of political intrigue. I appreciate the notion that we do have some transition between Padme being queen and senator, just because that's not a typical role switch that we are familiar with, at least in the United States here. So it's good to have some insight into that.
Yep.
So
She
yeah.
used to be this very formal figure as queen. Like she would have this regalia and these formal roles to manage her relationship with the public. But then we see she has to adopt a different persona as Padme Amidala, the senator.
Mhm.
And so that's a deliberate choice she makes, and she deliberately becomes less formal, but still uses the reputation of Naboo for like fancy outfits and such to leverage her position, which is a very interesting thing to do. When we see how politically astute she is, she's deliberately taking on a character a lot of the time. She sees Senator Padme as just another character that she's playing, in addition to Amidala the Queen was a character she was playing. Padme and Sabe both themselves wonders like who actually is Padme Amidala. Sabe's like, I have to impersonate her, and Padme's like, I have to be her.
Right, and they have a clear delineation, especially when you go from queen to senator.
Yeah, and yeah, you see Padme before she falls in love with Anakin Skywalker and derails her entire life. So that's always also interesting to see, where she's capable, intelligent, adaptable, also headstrong, thinks she knows more than she does, and sometimes draws in the loyalty of the people around her too much to the point where she risks alienating Sabe. So I won't go through the whole plot here, but like they talk about this new genre of like cozy fiction where you can read it and you're not worried that the characters are going to die or go through peril the whole novel. This is a cozy novel in Star Wars. You can read this about politics and Padme learning, and you're worried about like her political reputation and her relationship with her friends and how will she adjust. But aside from like, again, this one brief moment, we're not worried about her death, dying, and all that. So
we know that she's going to survive in episode 2 and 3.
Yeah. And then at the end of the novel, we have a flash forward where Padme has been killed and Sabe vows revenge on whoever did it. So, yeah.
So it seems to be pretty integral. I know that they continue the Queen storyline, even if it might be in comic books.
Yeah. So it's part of the Queen Shadow trilogy. So there's 3 books, one of which is a prequel, and then one of which provides. So there's, here's how the handmaids all got together in the lead up to the Phantom Menace, and then during the events of the Phantom Menace. And then there's a 3rd book that is set after Attack of the Clones, before Revenge of the Sith, showing when Padme needs to call upon Sabe again. So we can talk about those in the future. But I find this trilogy to be great. It shows this sort of interpersonal dynamic of a group of women in a political area in Star Wars we very rarely see. The deliberate decisions made, and puts a lot of emphasis on how am I being perceived? How is my role both in gender and in position affecting how I'm functioning in the world? How does the politics of the Senate work? So all of that I found very interesting. So if you're looking for some nice world building, and this is a very short, quick read, it's not terribly long, go ahead and give it a go. And as a book, it's cozy but tightly plotted, and you will enjoy it.
Oh, good. Sounds like a great way to reflect some of the importance of Padme and her handmaids in the world at large. And yeah, I'm excited to hear more about the Queen storyline. So then, pretty solid book by the sounds of it. And just taking a look here, we have some maybe a conclusion to this trilogy of prequel-based storylines with a story about Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn.
Yes, Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, who is one of my favorite Star Wars authors, to be honest.
That's a familiar name.
Yes, he wrote Lost Stars and Bloodline as well, 2 of the strongest Star Wars novels that exist. This is Master and Apprentice. Set prior to the Phantom Menace, and it's the tension between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan being a very traditional Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn being anything but a traditional Jedi. The novel starts out where Qui-Gon has been given the invitation to join the Jedi Council, which surprises him because he's like, I've never agreed with you. And Yoda's like, exactly, that's why you're perfect for the job. But before he can make a decision, they're sent on a crucial investigation to investigate a terrorist attack where a queen is going to be coronated in a planet that is, just considering joining the Republic. Further complicated and by the fact that this is the first book introduction to a character that I love, where there's a Jedi liaison to the planet and current regent kind of in violation of the council's preferences that he not be regent, is
Mhm.
Rael Avernos, or Rael Averos, who is the other Padawan that Dooku trained before Qui-Gon.
Ooh. And I'm guessing if you say former Padawan, he did not complete the trials and
No,
become
he
a
did.
Jedi?
He is a Jedi Knight for the duration of the novel.
Gotcha.
Not a Jedi Master.
Hmm.
And in fact, this is implied to be some sort of soft exile for him. He's a very non-traditional Jedi in that he sort of dresses slovenly, he womanizes. He is an excellent duelist, but sort of just he's a maverick like Qui-Gon Jinn is, but sort of in a Qui-Gon Jinn believes in the living Force.
Hmm.
Rail struggles with thinking of just using the Force as a tool. He's still on the light side. He hasn't fallen to the dark side. He's in no danger of falling to the dark side. But he's like, all these rules and regulations. Can't I just like at one point? I mean, he's openly carrying on an affair with another member of the court,
Hmm.
and Qui-Gon comes to talk to him, and he's just in bed with the woman who it's not. She's like, yeah, I'm sleeping with the hot Jedi, village hot Jedi guy. He's a silver fox. What of it? And Qui-Gon's just like, I'm not judging you, ma'am. I'm judging my former man I looked up to here, who's not supposed to do this. And then Rael's like, oh, you're such a stick in the mud. But Qui-Gon's not a stick in the mud. So the whole dynamic is nice. And then it's also Obi-Wan is convinced that Qui-Gon is going to accept the offer to join the Jedi Council and assign him to another master. Obi-Wan struggles with feeling like he's enough the whole book.
Hmm.
So it's them operating as master and apprentice. They're both, obviously, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan are very capable, but they're at odds for most of the book. And in fact, Qui-Gon is pursuing and has a plan for this planet. Obi-Wan goes behind his back to contact the Jedi Council. But the Jedi Council doesn't have all the information. I won't spoil. There's a plot twist that I won't spoil for the book, but the political situation on the planet is tense. There's an attempted assassination on the Queen, and then they want to join the Republic. The Zerka Corporation is also here trying to obtain hegemony over the planet, which causing some political tension. The Queen herself is relatively unpopular because she's seen just as a puppet for Zerka Corporation. So the whole thing is fraught with corporatism and control of a giant multi-galactic corporation over a planetary government, the tension that causes. So, and then there's literal like terrorist attacks and people die and the Jedi are involved, and are the Jedi being used by these various factions? It's very interesting. And then Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon have to deal with all of that while figuring out how they actually work as a master and apprentice.
I find it interesting because I know that there were Legends books set in the same era, focusing on Obi-Wan Kenobi as a new Jedi Padawan, and you have this apprentice in the form of Xanatos, Qui-Gon Jinn's former apprentice who was turned to the dark side. I think Rael Averos has a little bit more subtlety, where he is not exactly a dark side user, but he is certainly, it seems like he is exercising the Force in a very selfish, single-minded way.
Yeah, he's very convinced of his own rightness.
Mm-hmm.
There's several points in the novel where he just takes rash action, turns out not to be what he should have done.
Mm-hmm.
And Qui-Gon Jinn is portrayed as the person who's trying to get to the bottom of this.
True.
And Obi-Wan wonders, hey, would it be better if I was Rael's apprentice? Because he seems to kind of almost get it.
Mm-hmm.
But then disapproves of, doesn't see all of Rael's shortcomings in the way that Qui-Gon, who knows him better, can.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, every character's conflicted here. It's lovely to see inside Qui-Gon Jinn's head and how he perceives the world, and also see, and there's a novel called Padawan that we'll talk about in the future. Obi-Wan has this deep sense of inadequacy that he can't quite live up to what the Jedi Order demands of him.
Mm-hmm.
And later on that we know that he becomes a great Jedi, a general looked up to by everyone. But you see the same fragility that is what leaves him as we see him eventually in the Kenobi show, where he is broken and withdrawn from the world. We can see the seeds of that fragility even here as a Padawan, where when he finds this adversity, sometimes he rises to it, but when in the right way, it could just shatter his self-confidence completely.
So, getting insight into Qui-Gon, into Obi-Wan, into this, pre-Phantom Menace time is exciting. Does it live up to that expectation?
Oh yes, this Claudia Gray is exceptional at writing a Star Wars novel, so and just novels in general. So anything by her, I would always recommend. And because the story has a lot going on, but it never feels bloated, and the plot never feels stale, and it's always continues to surprise me. But like, oh, obviously we're gonna go here. It's like, oh, here's a chapter about these two jewel thieves slash surveyors. Where are they going with the story? Oh, here's some lore about kyber crystals versus kyberite crystals. Oh, we recanonized the Zerk Corporation from the Old Republic days, and oh, they're trying to control an entire planet to mine its resources. How do we feel about that? But it turns out the ruling elite is also exploiting the planet. Is their corporation better or worse than them? So it asks these evocative questions about politics, resources, the setting, representation, control, and there's not really any good side or bad side, which Qui-Gon Jinn realizes. Obi-Wan struggles with that, and I think this novel is his realization that the situations are more nuanced, which is the more successful and wiser Obi-Wan we see by the time of the Phantom Menace.
Mm-hmm. How would you stack it amongst Bloodline and Lost Stars?
I mean, I put all of Claudia Gray's books at the top. I mean, I think Lost Stars is generally held to be one of the best Star Wars novels of all time. I think Bloodline is like a tentpole holding up an entire era by itself, partially because it was so good that they haven't needed to put any more fiction out. And so I would put this one up there in the same way, and that is the definitive work about Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan together before the Phantom Menace. We have another work that just primarily focuses on Obi-Wan himself. But that's more about Obi-Wan's relationship with the Jedi Order than about his master.
Well, good on Gray for being able to come up with such powerful works, both prior to the original Lucas series to the conclusion.
All right. Well, let us talk about one more novel today before we wrap up, and this will conclude our look at the original Thrawn trilogy by talking about Thrawn Treason. So, also written by Timothy Zahn, Thrawn Treason pretty much leads Thrawn directly up to his appearance in Rebel Season 4, where we then know he then appears after that next, by necessity, in the Ahsoka show. Mm-hmm. So this is everything he's been doing in the Empire up until his confrontation with the crew of the Ghost.
So what insight do we get into Thrawn's character?
So this is Thrawn, and he's trying to push his TIE Defender project, as we see in Rebels, against Project Stardust with Director Krennic. Also, he's getting more demands from the Chiss Ascendancy to help with these incursions by the mysterious Grisk. And also, he's dealing with political enemies inside the Empire who would rather he be removed, killed, or discredited rather than still have the Emperor's ear. Mm-hmm. So, this is one of the most intricately plotted ones. The treason refers to Thrawn continually investigating someone who has betrayed the Empire. Mm-hmm. Some people thinking it's him and trying to portray it as him, and him trying to figure out who else it is.
As only he can do, as being the Sherlock Holmes of the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, so he's given like impossible jobs and investigations, and rather than dispatching people, he goes himself to do a lot of it because he doesn't trust anyone or their analytical ability. Mm-hmm. And continues the subplot about the Grisk who have using these mass drive generators on the Outer Rim, so to knock ships out of hyperspace. And most of the novel is told, as through the original Thrawn novel, through the perspective of his second, sort of his aide / assistant / confidant, Eli Vanto. And I love Eli Vanto, great guy. He isn't part of the Empire, so maybe not a great guy, but from a frontier planet trying to make good. So we see, and he's utterly loyal to Thrawn. So we see this Thrawn trying to navigate all of these different factions, trying to destroy him, with Eli having to explain to him some of the more political nuances, because Thrawn is often a military tactics he's good at, knowing when someone's trying to destroy his reputation, and how that will affect the soft power he wields. Mm-hmm. He struggles with more. One-on-one interpersonal relationships Thrawn's very good at. Understanding structural social relationships is harder for our blue-skinned Grand Admiral. All that said, we get great character work, and we see again how a fascist regime sows the seeds of its own destruction. None of the Imperial characters, with the exception of Thrawn and the people allied to him, are really looking out for the best interests of the Empire. They're all looking out for the best interests of themselves, including an admiral who I shall not name, so that I do not spoil the story for those who want to read it, but at some point turns out to be the traitor who was trying to undercut Thrawn and bolster his own protege, Krennic, instead, as part of this political game to gain the favor of the Empire. Or maybe not. There's several competing motivations. But I would say this admiral turns out, in the final confrontation, to have written several operas in his younger days. And so Thrawn, by looking at how he composed these operas, is able to determine the exact tactics he will take when presented with a Star Destroyer to Star Destroyer fight. And then, even though he's not even present on his ship at the time, is able to give such detailed commands that his crew is able to easily fend off the admiral's attacks, his treasonous attacks, purely by having studied his art.
Yeah, man after my own heart who uses history and who uses the creative output of a culture and an individual in order to learn more about them. Art acts as a form of artifact, just in a way to see how people communicate, think. So having Thrawn weaponize this as a means of gaining intel is quite interesting. It's something that's been true to his character since he was in Legends, and Zahn is pulled out in these novels by the sounds of it. So as far as the Thrawn trilogy goes, you had said that Thrawn Alliances was probably the lower dip. But
people say that. I personally think they're all great.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a book, I mean, Timothy Zahn doesn't write a bad novel. Mm-hmm. So, I would say that this one, as far as the plotting, the characters, the surprises, the twists, I really enjoy it. On a technical level, Timothy Zahn is an excellent novelist. Mm-hmm. As a piece of Star Wars fiction, this fills in the gaps for Thrawn. I mean, is it absolutely necessary to understand where Thrawn is coming from? No. But does it show the kind of pressures and influences on Thrawn that drives him to an increasingly hard line? Not that that absolves him of any of his responsibility for committing atrocities. Mm-hmm. I think people lionize Thrawn in a way where they like, oh, yeah, he's a good guy. It's like, no, Thrawn is a pragmatic person and honorable. That does not mean he's a good person. Mm-hmm. And we see that in full display where he doesn't want to kill a bunch of civilians, but will that help him? At this point, we now see where he makes the transition from the first Thrawn novel, where he really tries everything he can to avoid collateral damage, to where even Thrawn himself is not immune to the pressures of the Imperial war machine. And by the end of this novel, he's become more open and more pressured into making those kinds of decisions. And then to becoming the Thrawn we see in the Ahsoka show, where he's willing to form a cult of personality around himself and consort with dark side force users to accomplish his plans.
So that's one big takeaway from today's episode. If you are invested in current Star Wars and where the Disney Plus series is going, where Dave Filoni is going, he is obviously entrenched in the lore of Thrawn. So this seems to be a pretty crucial read for those who are invested in the modern face of Star Wars.
I would agree. So that is all the novels we're going to review today. Thank you all for your time. We will begin our next episode by looking at the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, which, along with the Aftermath trilogy, sets the stage for the mopping up the Imperial remnants after Return of the Jedi. And then we will go into the novels that build out the planet of Batu and also expand on what exactly the Resistance is, more so than we see in the actual sequel films.
Which is excellent, because that is something that is quite nebulous if you just watch the films alone, so I'm looking forward to learning more about that.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us for our EU review of novels, and we will talk to you next time.
We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.